afternoon, what we're going to do, we have these 3 resource people speak to us on issues relating to how you get civil society, the same civil society, how you get buy-in to policies that come down from policymakers, for one. So Stacey will talk about that. And we're going to ask Tembi to talk about, they're doing something very similar in Africa and Southern Africa. How are they getting the same thing that we're doing? What are they doing differently? What have been the results? What lessons they can share with us in terms of the Southern African experience as far as food and nutrition policy is concerned. And then Dr. Elizabeth Vincent will talk to us about where will the money come from, or where are the possible sources of money coming from to implement the actions and the policy and the action plan.
Thank you, Diane. My full name, although I'll urge all of you just to call me Tembi, but my full name is Tembile Ndema Mwamakamba. Actually, my surname is recently acquired. I come from the southern part of Africa, and my name is Zulu. I'm sure all of you are aware of the Zulu tribe. But my surname now, I'm recently married to a Tanzanian, so I'm now an African in all its essence. I come from the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, FANAPAN, which is very much like Carapan, the side of the world. And I would just like to thank Diane and her team for extending the invitation to us to come and share some of our experiences and to learn from you as well. The FANAPAN network, it's a policy analysis network that's comprising of about 14 Southern African countries, 16 actually this year. Kenya and Uganda joined us. It's really mandated to coordinate policy research and dialogue in the African region, and it was formed out of a call by the Ministers of Agriculture and Natural Resources of the East and Southern Africa. They wanted an independent entity that would advise them on some of the policy issues, hence the formation of FANAPAN. As a network, we comprise of several stakeholders. We have researchers. All our stakeholders have a vested interest in what we call FANA issues, food, agriculture, and natural resources issues. So we bring together researchers from different research institutions, be they universities or the CGIAR centers. We also have government ministries represented in our network. We also have the private sector that's interested in food, agriculture, and natural resources, farmer organizations, civil society, and we have just recently realized that for our mandate and our vision to be realized, we also need to involve the media because they have a unique way of spreading messages that we can't do on our own. So we've included the media. Then taking lessons from our Caribbean friends, this year we had a policy dialogue that was focusing on engaging the youth in the agriculture value chain. And one of the calls that came out of the meeting, which was held in Swaziland, and Craig Rollins, I was hoping to see him here today, was the representative from this region. There's been a call to also recognize the youth as a stakeholder on their own, as having a voice and being part of the FANA debates. So really we are a network of networks because in all the countries that we work in, we have what we call a country node that brings all these different stakeholders together to dialogue, much like you're doing here today. In terms of our focus areas for programs, we have 5 strategic program areas. We're looking at food systems, where we talk about issues that you have just been talking about this morning, issues of access, utilization, production, that sort of thing. Then we're also looking at agriculture productivity and markets. This is where we're looking at how women access markets. I'm actually responsible for coordinating the Women Accessing Realigned Markets project, which is looking at empowering women farmers to be able to advocate for better agricultural policies that ensure that they have access to markets. Then one of our biggest program areas is the natural resources and environment area, which focuses on issues of climate change, which are really topical in our region, as well as water. Then we have the social protection and livelihoods project area, where we have our HIV and AIDS project sitting under that thematic thrust, as well as vulnerability programs. Then lastly, we have the institutional strengthening component, which we've been working with CTA on. So basically, that's just in a nutshell the work that FANAPAN does. But maybe to give an explanation of how we come to partner with Carapan and we come to your region as friends. As FANAPAN, we believe what we call smart partnerships. We know that on our own we cannot get things done, so we look for people that have an interest in the same things that we are doing, that want to share and learn from us as well as we learn from them. So this is where we partner with CTA. CTA has been our partner since 2002, and they have been funding the equivalent of arts in our region, which we call regional multi-stakeholder policy dialogues. And I'll just like to recognize some of the members of the Carapan network that have participated in our policy dialogues. We have Dr. Lampkin. He was in Windhoek. I met him in Windhoek in 2010. Then we had Dr. Aisedu, Francis Aisedu, also participating in Maputo in 2009. And this year we had Craig coming in Swaziland. So really, we enjoy learning from what you here are doing, and we really appreciate, the different lessons that you share with us, and we hope that this is the beginning of a really good partnership. My boss actually asked me to emphasize that one area of partnership is the social accounting matrix, which Dr. Francis presented to us when he came to Maputo. And the president of Mozambique actually requested that this tool be used to take account of some of the developments that were happening, because there's always this notion that agriculture, the government is not putting enough towards agriculture. But then the president challenged us and said he needed a tool that would, because he's putting money in the water sector, he's putting money in natural resources, he's putting money in agriculture. All this money is scattered but not accounted for under agriculture. And from the presentation that Dr. Francis made, we were able to say now we can use this tool to be able to take account of all the investments that's going towards agriculture. So maybe to give you, that's what my organization is doing, but I was invited here to share some of the experiences on food and nutrition security in Africa. I'd like to start by giving you just a brief background of what the situation on the ground looks like, of how bleak it might seem, and I don't know, most people always refer to Africa as the dark continent. And I want from my presentation for you to have an understanding that Africa is not the dark continent. There's a lot that's happening in Africa. There's a lot of development that's going on. And although we have our challenges, we are also trying to address these challenges. Africa is home to about 240 million people that are undernourished. By undernourished, we mean that they consume less than 2.1 kilojoules per day. And malnutrition is viewed as one of the major leading causes of death and disability in Africa. Over 50 million African children suffer from chronic malnutrition, and 40% of the women are malnourished. Another 60% of under 5 years children and 50% of maternal mortalities are due to malnutrition. And given that picture, you will also have to understand that Africa spends annually about $30 billion on importing agricultural products. We are one continent that has the potential to feed the whole world, but we are not yet reaching our potential. So we still have a lot of work to do in terms of increasing our agricultural productivity and making use of the natural resources that we have. But given those challenges, what is being done? We have not been sitting idle. We have been trying our very best, and For a very long time as the continent, we have been working in a disjointed fashion. But in 2003, our leaders came together and they signed what we call the Maputo Declaration. This Maputo Declaration had all heads of states agreeing to reducing hunger and poverty by forming what we call the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CAADP. This CAADP has changed the face of agriculture in Africa. Since 2003, we have seen remarkable changes and a change in the focus, because usually agriculture was not one of the top priorities, but since 2003, agriculture has become the top priority. In 2004, we saw our heads of state meeting in Kampala in an All-Africa conference where they were prioritizing actions, strengthening actors and facilitating partnerships. They were looking at how best to get all the people that have a vested interest in agriculture coming together and working towards achieving a food-secure Africa. In 2006, we had the Abuja Food Security Summit, where stakeholders committed to ending hunger and malnutrition. And in 2010, last year, we had the launch of the Africa Food and Nutrition Day, which is now commemorated annually on the 30th of October. Last year, when our ministers met in Windhoek, they were tasked with coming up with a theme for this year's Food Security and Nutrition Day. And the theme for this year is investing in intra-African trade for food and nutrition security. This day will be celebrated, as I said, on the 30th of October, and it is meant to provide stakeholders a platform at all levels, be it farmer levels, be it university students, private sector, bringing everyone together and trying to come up with tangible solutions of achieving the MDGs by 2015. So with all these plans, why have we not achieved our goal of reducing malnutrition? I would like to say we are facing the very same problem that I had been discussed here, the problem of silo approach to some of our development programs. There is a lack of coordination and communication across key ministries, across key institutions. For instance, our health, agriculture, education, and trade sectors, they are not communicating. But we realize that for us to achieve food and nutrition security, there has to be this meeting point of all these key institutions. Then there's also, the problem of preaching to the converted. When we get to those meetings where we're talking about these issues, it's the same people that have been with the processes from the start. We are not talking to farmers, we are talking to researchers. We're not talking to the consumers, the people that actually buy the food, but we're talking to people that make policies. So we realize that there's a need to change the policy arena, because in Africa, the policy arena has been the preserve of the literate. And we realize that in some countries, illiteracy levels are as high as 40%. So how do we get to those people that don't have access to some of these platforms? I would like to go back to the CAADP, Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program. This program has 4 mutually supporting pillars. Pillar 1, we're looking at sustainable land and water management. Pillar 2, we're looking at improving market access. Pillar 3, we're looking at African food security. This is where we are focusing on reducing hunger and malnutrition. Under this pillar, there are tools that have been developed recently in 2009 that are aimed at driving the agenda and implementing some of the ideas that have come up. The first one is looking at the African Regional Nutrition Strategy. Then we have what we call the Pan-African Nutrition Initiative. These tools, they have flagship programs that fall within them. And the first one is the Homegrown School Feeding Program. I heard in the morning you were talking about the programs that you already have within the region, but you are also looking at how to maximize their impact, how to make them more effective. That's the sort of thing that we are also discussing in Africa. Then we have policy advocacy and support. As there was one example that was given on YAMS that I was listening to on how to get some messages across, and the idea of using well-recognized people, I think, is really an excellent idea, because people tend to identify with those people and they would like to do what they do. So in Africa, we are also looking at having figures that are authoritative to speak on some of these issues. One of our ambassadors is the former Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan. He has been very instrumental in promoting agriculture, you know, as a priority in Africa, and through the African Green Revolution Alliance, we now have a channel for us to push some of these programs. So really, this is just an overview of some of the initiatives that we have going on the continent. And we would love to learn from you as well as to share some of our experiences. We are hoping that in a year or two when we come back to share our, we'll be sharing on how we have managed to implement some of these programs. Thank you.
And on that note, she did mention that investing in intra-African trade for food security, the CAFAN network has been bawling for, well, from the time they've been born, about having intra-Caribbean trade and letting the farmers at the forefront. So Stacey Rose Richards represents the CAFAN network, and she'll let you know what they have been trying to do to put the policy out of the papers and into the ground and food on our table from the Caribbean point of view, and not necessarily from just we grow it right here in Dominica, but grow it in the Caribbean, eaten in the Caribbean, traded throughout the Caribbean. Stacey.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, the Caribbean Farmers Network, for those who do not know, is a network of farmers organizations based in 14 Caribbean countries, encompassing 24 farmers organizations, including 4 agricultural societies. So that is why the count is up over 500,000 members. Farmer leaders in the CAFAN network in each member country coordinates its activities on the ground and feeds back to the Secretariat, which is based in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and run by a chief coordinator, which is Mr. Jethro Green. The Secretariat has no paid staff, but the network and the Secretariat are run on volunteers who volunteer their time to do various aspects of the work of CAFAN. CAFAN recently approved its constitution, which states that it should have a board comprising of the farmer leaders of all the farmer organizations in the member states. So we can see where CAFAN is moving from just a network, basically maybe not as formalized, to a more formalized network where the constitution was passed last month, and it will be signed by all the farmers organizations. So we can see where CAFAN is moving. With respect to the policy process, CAFAN was engaged by CARICOM Secretariat to join the technical working group, which I hope it would have been said that really was instrumental in the formulation of the policy. Now, CARICOM's reason for doing that was to include the voice of the producer in the development of the policy. This paid off for them because subsequently, after approval of the policy in 2010, October 2010, CAFAN in 2011 decided to support CARICOM in the implementation of its policy by having a workshop entitled Linking Producers to Markets in July 2011, also funded by CT and the CARICOM Secretariat, along with FAO, to come up with crops and areas of intervention in which CAFAN would work on the ground to, one, look at a basket of commodities, basically fresh produce, in terms of not livestock as yet, but fresh produce, where each member state will contribute certain items to the basket, and it would feed into their domestic market, their region and the regional market, and also for extra-regional purposes. This CAFAN also, this was decided, these crops have been highlighted by each country, and they were decided upon and agreed upon by the farmers' organization representatives at the July meeting. So this is a democratic process in which the farmers' organizations decided that we are going to contribute to this regional basket of food according to the food security policy, which says that it wants to identify regional nutritious food and push those foods so that producers will be able to produce them and supply them to the market, whether domestically, regionally, or extra-regionally. So the producers themselves decided this, what crops they want to contribute, and they wanted to supply the domestic, regional, and extra-regional markets. So this is very good. They did it with no, what should I say, persuasion from government, but they have themselves within the network decided that. Then they came up with 2 project proposals in that meeting. One, to support the promotion of Caribbean produced foods, and 2, for a regional production and marketing program, which now would look at all of the commodities they have chosen and really projectize it to see what are the areas that need intervention. For example, the capacity building of their organizations, to improve the producer marketing linkages between the producers and the market so that they will know how to identify their own markets, how to negotiate with the market, and how to supply their market. Also to improve their production techniques and their post-harvest and so on. So when they participate in the market, they produce the highest quality food. So 2 project proposals were determined by that meeting, and the producers themselves agreed upon it because they themselves helped in the writing of those project proposals along with the technical people who were there. But it was expressly their crops and their needs, right? So we can see where CAFAN is coming from. It is not a top-down approach, as CAFAN likes to say, where the government or an institution puts something on them, but it's them. It originates from them. What crops they want to produce, how they want to participate in the process, purely democratic. And I think that is very commendable for a producer organization to do. But how did it come? It came from the engagement of the CARICOM Secretariat, of the producer network in the policy process. After participating in this process for a couple of months, coming to the meetings, doing the policy development, then the producer saw it fit to say, you know what? If I don't help CARICOM to practicalize this policy, to implement it on the ground, then it won't reach anywhere. And so they say, CARICOM, please help us to fund this workshop so that we can come up and determine priority crops, priority areas, so we can do project proposals, so get funding and we can start a program. So their program is the Regional Production and Marketing Program, in which they'll be looking at these commodities and doing the various interventions to ensure that linkages to the local market, the regional market, and the international market are done. And also, they want the promotion of locally produced foods, regionally produced foods, to the Caribbean consumer. And they want to push that from their end. They don't want the government to push it for them. They don't want FAO, IECA to push it for them. They want to push it for them and see how they can get their own resources to do so. So I think this is very commendable, because when we engage people as policymakers, it will pay off and bring dividends once they understand the process and once they're able to assimilate that this will do good for me to participate in, and I am a partner with you. And I think that is what that engagement by CARICOM did for CAFAN. And so now CAFAN is now doing for CARICOM, being an implementing partner, which is very essential, because without the producer, a policy can't move forward. You know, it's a food and nutrition security policy, so it's more than the producer, the fresh producer, but they are a start because of livelihood concerns, where we know that they are about their major composition of the rural economies, and also for food concerns. We know that the small farmer in the Caribbean have fed us for years now, and so I think it is very commendable, but we have to know at what point to start, and I think CARICOM Secretariat did the best thing by starting by engaging CAFAN.
Good morning, everyone. I was asked to present some views on possible means of financing the food and nutrition security agenda in the Caribbean. And what I will do this morning is to present some ideas. Some might be new, some might be extremely old, but I do have a PowerPoint presentation, so it's sort of very systematic, so I want to go through that presentation. But what I will do, and I can start basically, is to look at some of the major sources of funding food and nutrition security in the region. We can look at foreign direct investment. Okay. Inflows of foreign direct investment, usually from multinational organizations, as well as official development assistance. We can look at government allocation to agriculture, to education, to health, related to food and nutrition security. We can look at the general situation with respect to domestic savings, because it's out of savings that you're going to get your investments. And if you're consuming a lot of your growth, your GDP, then you will have very little to invest. And then the issue of the way forward. Foreign direct investments, basically for job creation, raise productivity, enhance exports, and transfer of technology. What's the trend? And the information that I do have is up to 2008. Significant fluctuations with a downward tendency. I can recall in 2002, there was a 23% drop in overall foreign direct investment. I think it was from $823 to $651 billion. So significant fluctuations. Approximately 70% of the inflows goes to the developed world, approximately 10% to Latin America and the Caribbean, and to the Caribbean specifically, we're talking about 3%. The last figure that I looked at, and within the Caribbean context, if you eliminate or take out the Dominican Republic, which had close to $1 billion US FDIs, the region was close to $1.6 billion. Of course, most of that went to Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and the sectors, basically energy, and that's why Trinidad, and the tourism sector, Jamaica, Bahamas. Well, I mentioned initially significant fluctuations. There are some factors driving those fluctuations were macroeconomic, some macroeconomic factors, as well as institutional factors. We still do have corporate scandals and so on. Within the regional context, we are trying to develop an enabling environment for investment, and we're also trying to harmonize measures in the context of the single market and economy. I'm not going to go through that, but with respect to the enabling environment, these are some of the issues that we're trying to do. There are a lot of countries do have investment promotion institutions. Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados. So they're trying to promote foreign direct investment. What's the situation with respect to overseas development assistance? I have, in terms of some selected countries, I'm indicating the inflows as a percentage of GDP. And you would have realized that Guyana is very significant in Guyana. But Barbados, Dominican Republic, a lot of these countries would have, to some extent, graduated from receiving those ODAs. Barbados is one, Trinidad and Tobago would be one. That's the OCS. There has been a decline, significant decline in the flows of ODAs, Overseas Development Assistance to the region. And I do think the situation is going to get worse because of the global economic financial situation. You would have been hearing about the PIGS. Well, it's not just PIGS, which is Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. But there's also Ireland, which is touching on the brink of joining that group. So but there's a serious problem, and it's going to have implications for Europe, the European Union, and also the European currency. So the point is the prospect of having additional inflows of ODAs into the region is going to be quite limited. Domestic savings ratio. I mentioned what it is. Right? It's how much you save out of how much you produce. So if you're consuming 100%, simply means that we might end up consuming ourselves. Right? It is fairly low in the Caribbean. Barbados 12%, Guyana 24%, Jamaica 14%. I am not sure why that number is so high for Antigua and Barbuda. Dominica 11, 14, 21, 17, 18. But it's fairly low. It's suggesting that we are not saving, we are consuming. What's the government allocation to the agricultural sector? Right? There are two issues there. It has to do with the size of the allocation, and there are some intersectoral implications. Okay. Sorry. I means increase, C constant, D decline. So those are some historical movement in government allocations to the agricultural sector. There's Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. Let me mention, over the last, I would say last 5 years, there has been an upward movement in the allocation by government to those sectors. Right? I need to recognize that, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, but the others are declining.
How exactly is that increase or decrease?
What's that?
How exactly did you mention?
A rate of change over if you had $100 allocation in 1999 and it's 101 in 1992, then it's a decrease. Okay? I have some time period, which would be the average. What's the average for the various time period? I am saying that the government allocation is either reflecting basically how we view the sector in terms of its importance in contributing to economic development, because sometimes we talk but we don't act, right? Or It's a relative power of your minister within cabinet. I think Julian mentioned that this morning. It's a reality. So, we do have a problem. Intrasectoral allocation. I did some work in the OCS with respect to that. Let me talk between capital and recurrent budget. In the late 90s, early 2000, I'm boring you, right? The budgets, a lot of the capital budgets in the OCS was predicated on the framework of assistance out of the European Union. So when you look at budgeted capital budgets, which was budgeted, right, and actual expenditure, there was a big gap. In fact, I remember, I'm not going to recall the country. So it means that there was limited inflows of SFE into capital items, into capital investment. Right? It's a serious thing. The second has to do with the allocation among the various line items. These allocations are not driven to a large extent by the strategic needs and the intervention of those member states. Right? And the process, let's talk about it. They look at budget, what was it last year? We're going to add 10%. Right? That's not strategic thinking or budgeting. Right? So, there's a problem. Then the question, is there adequate finance for investment in FNS, food and nutrition security, or how can we finance our food and nutrition security? Conclusion, recommendations. Summarizing, decline in final direct investments inflows. That's a reality. Decline in overseas development inflows. Decline in government allocation to the sector. You ask yourself, where's the money going to come from if we have decline? Okay? And also, there's a recognition that domestic savings, because of the level of domestic savings, are insufficient to provide that level of investment resources for the sector. The last time I made a presentation similar to this, I suggested that we need to focus heavily on foreign direct investment. But when you start to look at the attractiveness, because investors do and develop what they call attractive scores for various countries based on various risk factors. Right? We are not number one. There are some countries that are fairly high on the scale of attractiveness. Right? We're not number two. In fact, we are way down for several reasons. Political and other issues. But I think there are opportunities, but there are things we have to do. Without subsidy, it is very difficult to attract foreign direct investments within the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is characterized by weak purchasing power. Our domestic markets, our regional market, both are very small, relatively. Right? In fact, the last, we had an we had an agricultural insurance symposium last week in Antigua. We're trying to get some of the reinsurers into the conference, and they would tell you that we're not interested. You don't have that critical mass. So it's a problem. Small is beautiful at times, but there are times we have to struggle through that. Am I having problems with that? No. One of the things we can do is what I'm suggesting there. We can utilize multilateral and bilateral development institutions to act as catalytic financiers. I'll tell you a story. CDB will tell you that they do have resources, and it goes to the third point, to lend to the agricultural sector. Right? But they're not getting the projects. I remember, I think it was in 2008, CDB approved only one agricultural project. So there's some element of liquidity in the system. Right? But we are not exploiting that. These are some issues related to, and I mentioned some of them, project skill shortages, market small, lack of capacity to prepare bankable projects. And there are times when you have a mismatch between the requirements of a lot of these development institutions, partners, because sometimes they want to dictate to you what you should do, which is I'm not sure, it's not necessarily needs driven or responding to the needs of the country. So there's sometimes mismatch with our priorities and what they would like you to do based on their agenda. So what are some of the things we need to do? We need to do a lot of what I call, with respect to multinational risk mitigation, political risk, credit risk, and currency exchange risk. I don't think the currency exchange risk is so much of a problem. Before, historically, we had problems with exchange rate variability in Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana. Guyana, Trinidad has to a large extent settled down. Jamaica is still a little variable, but it's not as great. Others have fixed exchange rates. Capacity building, here I'm talking about preparing bankable projects, right? And ensuring greater transparency. Accessing donor resources in a very aggressive but strategic manner. I was involved in 2 investment forums. One was an agribusiness investment forum in Guyana, that was in 2008, and there was this donor conference in Trinidad in 2007. And the donor conference, we had a package of I think 51 projects, value over $300 million, trying to get money from donors. It didn't work. We need to be strategic. Can I tell you how we need to be? You'll be surprised how they know these institutions. They know more about us than we do know about them. Right? There are times I'm sitting somewhere trying to get some numbers, right? And the numbers are in Washington. Right? They know it, but you can't even get it out of your government. Right? I'm suggesting that we need to study them. They like to use buzzwords. Right? We need to know what are the areas, their priority areas. And sometimes we need to put that face. And I use an example. You might be involved in an agritourism project. There might be very little interest in agriculture, but there might be an interest in tourism. So you show them a tourism face. Right? The face is tourism. What is the same agritourism project? So we need to be very strategic. We need to promote regional projects. And Sergio will tell you again that we need to create public goods. There are resources within the IDB for that. And Tracy mentioned issues of transportation. We're talking about enhancing intra-regional trade. But we don't have the transportation system. You cannot put a first-grade product in a third-quality vessel and expect it to arrive first grade. Right? I've been on a lot of those schooners, right? Because I did some work on bananas, looking at interregional trade in bananas within the region. First grade out of St. Lucia, when it gets there, it's third. Because we don't have the facility. We need to upgrade those transportation. Okay? I know there are 2 proposals that have been evaluated. I think one might be starting, that's the Southern Ferry with Trinidad and Tobago. There might be a trial run. But these are the things that we need to invest in. And we need to focus somehow on cross-border investment. People are saying Guyana has the lands, Trinidad has some, Trinidad has oil and money, Jamaica has nothing. I'm kidding, I'm from Jamaica. Helen, don't take me serious. Right? Belize and Suriname has land. Right? So we can look at some cross-border investment, but we need to have the political will. And we need to look at our laws and our regulations. These are some quickly issues, tax, concession and capital items. I like the second to the last. We need to give tax allowances to financial institutions that are willing to put some resources into agriculture. Right? I am a great believer in creation of incentives and disincentives. Right? Right? If you can do a lot of targeting, it can work. I don't know how we can lower the cost of investment. This is something that I think we have to do. In fact, when the action plan was proposed, the minister said, I want to have some bold proposals, right? I think this is something that we need to look at seriously. In fact, over the weekend, I don't know if Julian, you might help me, but there was some discussion about incentives, disincentives for healthy diets, right? Okay? We talk about, sometimes proudly, about import bill of $4 billion US. We like to talk about it. I do it, right? Let us put a if you put it, let us tax it. And I did that equation. I hope my maths is right, because that's one thing I wasn't too good at high school. 2.5% of the $4 billion, that's $100 million US annually to help us in our effort or agenda to achieve food and nutrition security. It's something that we need to, it's something that is compliant with WTO, so that's something that we don't have to worry about whether we are in compliance with WTO, but it's something that we need to look at seriously, right? One of the, and I'm going to tell you, we talk about declining agricultural budgets, allocation. Health is moving through the roof because we are not prepared to invest in the short term to reap the benefits in the long term. So we're prepared to spend the cost for chronic, non-communicable diseases. Right? It's getting out of hand. And we're not talking about old people. We're talking about young people, 30, 40, dying. Right? We need to decide. We need to make bold decisions. Otherwise, the next 10 years, 2026, we'll be here talking about the same thing and discussing the same thing. I think I want to thank you very much for listening to me. And the final thing, I don't know where that is. Thank you.
But I'd like to invite just two key people who I think can add value to the closing, to give us their feedback on what is the main message that they want to bring out there. And you know we have media as part of the round table, because the media is the one who always convinces people of what to do sometimes when we can't convince them ourselves. They sell the message, and like they like to say, they tell you the truth. So they are not the propaganda for the politicians, they're not the propaganda for the agencies. The media will tell you what it is you need to do. So I'd like to invite Mr. Wilkinson Burt from the media to let us know what he thinks should be the main message coming out of this forum.
I was in Grenada last year for similar sessions, and I am not surprised that some of the same points we made last year are back, and I share Diane's fears that in 2026 we might be talking about the same issues with the next generation. One one point that stood out that nearly every speaker addressed this morning had much to do with lack of proper policies or support mechanisms from governments for promoting regional agriculture, food security, food safety, etc. I share the point that was made that we are not using or prominent people like Usain Bolt, Grenada's Zone, Kirani James, and other prominent people to promote regional foods. I could tell you from my own experiences that I see Church's Chicken, which recently came to Guyana, is now the leading fast food outlet. And it's not an accident that a lot of its outlets are located near schools. I fear that, I share the points made this morning by many speakers, that the next generation in Guyana, which produces and dumps food every day, will not eat the way their parents or even my generation eats. Stacey Rose mentioned the progress and progression of the farmers network in the region. It's how it's moving to formalize itself, how it has adopted a new constitution that soon is going to be approved and signed off by farmers' organizations. Julius and Dr. Vincent were on the ball talking about the lack of capitalization from governments and central authorities, lack of subsidies, which complement the lack of support mechanism and policies by governments for regional products. Dr. Vincent, and I wish he could elaborate on it at some stage, mentioned that there is a lot of money, and Diana, I think you did too as well. There is money out there for agricultural projects, but the project documents are not reaching those who have the money to support. Yeah, and they're also not packaged properly for approvals. Dr. Vincent mentioned the point that CARICOM leaders seem to be zooming in on a bit, the extent to which people are living with communicable disease, chronic diseases in the region. And it's all linked to unhealthy foods. Again, it goes back to the point made by several speakers that we're not, again, using our prominent people to promote and increase public awareness of what we should eat and what we should not. Another point that was raised had to do with the example that Diane mentioned in Haiti and the mud cakes issue in Haiti. The point that came out that it's kind of a sin that you have Guyana, Belize, Suriname with all the land area. Guyana and Belize overproducing food, Suriname as well, and we have a sister CARICOM country where people, hundreds of thousands of people are going hungry. And still nothing is being done. We're going to come here or somewhere else next year and make the same point, and there might not be an improvement. What has not come out is the extent to which we are not complaining about where we're not, and maybe our failure to declare what's happening in the region as a political sin. That food is there, healthy food is there, it's not reaching people who need it the most. For now, I stop here at this point. I think Julius just want to make a complimentary. Yeah.
Not really. I really wanted to pose a question to Dr. Little and also to Stacey Rose, and that is essentially, I'd like your take on the real world issue that I mentioned, where you have a clear disconnect between policy, the instant policy, which says we're bringing in chicken and we're doing away with the common external tariff on imported chicken or imported whatever it is. The franchises are growing in significance. Most of them are funded by Trinidadian business interests. So it's not massa coming from on high. It's all of us that doing this thing, this business of these quick service restaurants. And I want your perspective on how you're going to deal with the issue of the high cost of food, which is part of the whole cost of living political agenda. We had a government in Barbados that said that its first priority, first, second, and third priority was the cost of living, the cost of living, the cost of living. And their idea of dealing with the cost of living is to bring in an American wholesale/retail or no frills food distribution. One of those price smart, they're smart and not very smart. That is their way of dealing with our food bill at the store by increasing our food import bill by allowing these major franchises to sell food cheaply. How do you address that while at the same time suggesting that we put a tax on that food import bill? So to me, that's the contradiction there. That as a policy measure, it makes sense to create a kind of a polluter pays principle. If you're going to buy the imported food, you have to pay for it. But at the same time, the politicians are being told by their constituents the food too expensive, bring down the cost. I want a farmer's perspective especially, and I don't know if Tembe, you have any particular perspective from Southern Africa that you could bring to this, but I'd be very keen to hear your take on that.
Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Julius. And I want you to hold on to those questions to the next round when Tembe and Stacey and Vincent can provide some definitive answers for you. And at this point, I would really like to say thank you. Their work is not yet over, to Tembe, Vincent, and Stacey, and our speakers this morning on the various issues of the Food Security Policy and Action Plan. Again, to repeat that it is a document that we all should read to educate ourselves as to what is in it, what it means for us as a household, and what it means for us as a country, where we can go with it. If there are issues in there that you feel are not properly adequately addressed, you can always flag that to the CARICOM Secretariat or to the Ministry of Agriculture, who is your lead liaison in that area, and see what you as an individual household, individual stakeholder can do to make things different, to implementing the policy. So on behalf of all of our speakers for this session and the session before the break, on behalf of everybody in the audience, in the room, we'd like to thank you very much. On behalf of those who are going to read whatever the media guys put out during the course of the week or next week on their take on the topic, we'd like to thank you so much for sharing information. The sharing of information is not going to stop there, because we're going to have access to them by email. We're going to have access to them for the rest of the week, where we can talk one-on-one, and we can get deeper into the discussion on food and nutrition security.